My name is Amber Collins, and I am 26 years old. When I was 12, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. For the past 4 years, I have been living with my parents, paying them $1,000 monthly for rent, food, and my medical expenses. Last Christmas Day, they sat me down and made an announcement that would change everything. They wanted me to stop my diabetes treatment because it was too expensive. I simply said, okay. If only they knew what that decision would cost them. Before I dive into this life-changing story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Also, if you appreciate real stories about standing up for yourself, hit that subscribe button and like this video. My relationship with my parents, Karen and Michael Collins, had always been complicated. Growing up in suburban Pennsylvania, we appeared to be your typical middle-class family. Dad worked as an insurance salesman, and Mom was an elementary school teacher. They provided a stable home. But there was always an undercurrent of financial anxiety that colored our family dynamics. When I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 12, they initially rallied around me. There were tearful hospital visits, careful meal planning, and dedicated learning about insulin injections. Mom even joined a support group for parents of diabetic children. But as the years passed and the medical bills accumulated, their attitudes subtly shifted. What began as concern for my health gradually morphed into concern about costs. Do you really need to check your blood sugar that often? Mom would ask, eyeing the test strips. Those things are $5 a pop. Actually, they're about $2 each with insurance, I would correct her. And yes, I need to check regularly to stay alive. By the time I graduated college with my graphic design degree, the economy had tanked. Finding a job that paid enough to cover both rent in our expensive area and my medical costs seemed impossible. When my parents suggested I move back home while building my career, it seemed like the practical choice. We agreed I would pay them $1,000 monthly, covering my portion of household expenses and medical costs. My insurance through my employer had a high deductible, meaning I paid significant out-of-pocket expenses for insulin, pump supplies, continuous glucose monitor sensors, and quarterly endocrinologist visits. The arrangement wasn't ideal, but it allowed me to work and save money while managing my condition. What my parents never seemed to grasp, even after 14 years, was that type 1 diabetes isn't a lifestyle disease. It's an autoimmune condition where my pancreas produces no insulin whatsoever. Without synthetic insulin, I would die within days. This isn't an exaggeration or a dramatic statement, it's medical fact. My daily diabetes management was complex and constant. Every morning began with checking blood glucose levels and calculating insulin doses based on my planned breakfast carbohydrates. Throughout the day, I would check my levels 6 to 8 times, adjusting insulin as needed. My insulin pump needed site changes every 3 days, and my continuous glucose monitor sensor needed replacement weekly. Quarterly doctor visits ensured everything was on track, with regular blood work monitoring long-term control. The costs added up quickly, even with insurance. I spent approximately $800 monthly on diabetes supplies and care. The remaining $200 of my payment to my parents covered a fraction of household expenses. My career as a graphic designer was slowly building momentum. I worked for a small marketing firm that offered decent benefits but modest pay. Working remotely during the COVID pandemic allowed me to save on commuting costs, but also meant I was constantly under my parents' roof and supervision. I had been quietly saving for my eventual move to independence, but the pandemic housing market had sent rental prices soaring beyond my reach. Our family had always made a big production of Christmas. Mom decorated every inch of the house with garlands, lights, and her collection of Santa figurines. Dad insisted on the largest tree that would fit in our living room. We maintained traditions of Christmas Eve movies, special breakfasts, and elaborate gift exchanges. But in recent years, I had noticed increasing tension around holiday spending. Mom would make comments about the cost of gifts while opening presents. Dad would sigh heavily when looking at credit card statements in January. The joy of giving seemed overshadowed by financial stress. Still, nothing prepared me for what would happen during last year's Christmas celebration. The tension had been building in subtle ways I failed to recognize. Mom had been asking more questions about my medical supplies, noting their costs with increasing frequency. Dad had started making comments about kids staying home forever these days, despite my consistent rent payments. There had been hushed conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, quick changes of subject when I asked questions. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. But sometimes, when you're focused on simply managing a chronic illness day by day, you miss the warning signals around you. You don't expect a bombshell to drop during Christmas dinner, especially one that could threaten your life. Christmas morning started like any other in the Collins household. I woke early, as I always did, to check my blood sugar and administer insulin before the day's festivities began. The living room looked like something from a holiday catalog: twinkling lights on the 7-foot Douglas fir, presents wrapped in coordinating paper, and stockings bulging with small gifts. Mom made her traditional cinnamon rolls while Dad brewed coffee. We opened gifts in our matching pajamas, another family tradition. I received the usual practical items: office supplies for my work-from-home setup, a few clothing items, and a new glucose meter case that Mom had found online. I gave them framed professional photographs I had taken during our summer lake trip, which seemed well received. Everything appeared normal until dinner. Mom had prepared the usual feast: turkey, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, and rolls. We sat down at the dining room table, which had been carefully set with the good china and crystal glasses rarely used outside holidays. After Dad carved the turkey and we filled our plates, my parents exchanged a look that made my stomach tighten. I recognized that look. It preceded serious conversations. Like when they told me my childhood dog had passed away, or when they explained they couldn't afford to help with college tuition. "Amber, we need to talk about something important," Dad began, setting down his fork without taking a bite. "Your mother and I have been discussing this for months, and we feel Christmas is the perfect time because it's about family and new beginnings." Mom reached for a folder that had been hidden beneath her napkin. "Sweetie, we've been looking at our finances, and the truth is, we simply cannot continue supporting your medical expenses. The insulin, the test strips, all those doctor visits, it's just too expensive." I stared at them, fork suspended midway to my mouth. "What do you mean?" "I pay you for my medical expenses. That's part of our arrangement." Dad shook his head. "The $1,000 barely covers everything, and with inflation, it's just not enough anymore. We're approaching retirement age, and we need to think about our future." Mom opened the folder and spread several printouts across the table, narrowly missing the gravy boat. "We've been researching alternatives, and there are natural remedies that many people say have cured their diabetes." I glanced at the papers, articles from questionable websites with titles like Cinnamon, Nature's Insulin, and How I Cured My Diabetes with Apple Cider Vinegar. Another paper detailed some obscure breatharian technique claiming diabetes could be managed through specialized breathing and sunlight exposure. "These aren't legitimate medical sources," I said carefully, feeling a cold weight settling in my chest. "And they're talking about type 2 diabetes, which is completely different from my condition. Type 1 cannot be cured or managed without insulin. That's what the pharmaceutical companies want you to believe," Dad said confidently. "They make billions keeping people dependent on their products." Mom nodded eagerly. "Mrs. Peterson's son reversed his diabetes completely with a special diet. No more medications at all." "Mrs. Peterson's son has type 2 diabetes," I explained for what felt like the 1,000th time. "His pancreas still produces insulin. Mine doesn't. Without synthetic insulin, I will die." "Don't be so dramatic," Dad said, waving his hand dismissively. "People lived with diabetes before insulin was invented." "They died from it," I corrected, fighting to keep my voice steady. "The life expectancy for a type 1 diabetic before insulin was discovered was less than 3 years from diagnosis." My mother reached across the table and patted my hand. "We're just asking you to try. Starting January 1st, we want you to stop the insulin and try these natural alternatives. If it doesn't work after a few months, you can go back to the medication." A few months. Without insulin, I wouldn't last a few weeks, let alone months. I sat there, mind racing. I was financially dependent on my parents, living under their roof. My savings weren't enough for both a security deposit on an apartment and the medical supplies I would need. The job market was still recovering from pandemic disruptions. I needed time to figure out a solution. Okay, I said finally. My parents' faces lit up with surprise and relief. Clearly, they had expected a fight. Really? You'll try? Mom asked, excitement evident in her voice. I nodded, choosing my words carefully. I understand your concerns about the cost. I'll figure something out. Dad grinned and raised his glass in a toast. To new beginnings and natural healing. They clinked glasses while I forced a smile, my mind already calculating how much insulin I had stockpiled and how long it would last. I had about a 3-week supply if I was careful. That would give me time to research options and make alternative arrangements. The rest of Christmas Day passed in a blur. My parents seemed almost giddy with their perceived victory, talking animatedly about the money they would save and how they might use it for home renovations they had been postponing. They didn't notice my quietness, attributing it to contemplation of my new, natural healing journey. After dinner, I retreated to my room, laptop in hand. I began researching patient assistance programs, diabetes support communities, and affordable housing options. I sent emails to my doctor explaining the situation and asking for guidance. I messaged close friends, discreetly asking about potential living arrangements. As I worked late into the night, I could hear my parents downstairs, laughing and discussing their plans for the money they believed they would save, approximately $800 monthly. They were already counting their additional income, oblivious to the fact that their decision would ultimately cost them far more than they had ever paid for my medical care. That night, as Christmas decorations cast shadows on my bedroom wall, I made a promise to myself. I would never again put my health in someone else's hands, not even my parents. This was a turning point, though I didn't yet realize just how significant it would be. The week between Christmas and New Year's took on an eerie quality. My parents watched me with hawk-like vigilance, as though expecting me to cheat on their natural remedy plan before it even officially began. Mom started placing cinnamon in everything, my coffee, oatmeal, even sprinkled on vegetables at dinner. Cinnamon regulates blood sugar, she would announce proudly, as though she had discovered some medical breakthrough. Dad brought home bottles of apple cider vinegar, which he insisted I drink diluted in water 3 times daily. The acidic liquid burned my throat and upset my stomach, but I complied in their presence. What they didn't know was that I continued taking insulin in private. I kept my supplies hidden in an old makeup bag in my desk drawer, administering injections when they weren't around since I had temporarily abandoned my insulin pump, which was too visible. I checked my blood sugar in the bathroom with the door locked, carefully disposing of test strips by wrapping them in tissue and burying them deep in the trash. This deception wasn't sustainable. My stockpile of insulin would run out eventually, and the irregular administration schedule made my blood sugar levels erratic. Some days, when I couldn't find privacy to inject, my numbers would soar dangerously high, leaving me nauseous and fatigued. Other times, I would overcompensate with too much insulin, sending me perilously close to hypoglycemia. Meanwhile, I was working frantically to find solutions. I contacted the Diabetes Research Foundation and explained my situation. They connected me with patient advocates who outlined available assistance programs. The application processes were complex, requiring extensive documentation and proof of financial need. Many had waiting periods of several months. My endocrinologist, Dr. Patel, was horrified when I explained the situation during a telehealth appointment I scheduled while my parents were shopping. "This is medical neglect," she said firmly, "even though you're an adult. Preventing access to life-sustaining medication could be considered abuse. Would you like me to speak with your parents?" I declined her offer, knowing it would only create more conflict while I was still dependent on their housing. Instead, Dr. Patel provided samples of insulin to supplement my dwindling supply and connected me with the hospital's social worker who might help identify emergency resources. As January progressed, the physical toll mounted. I developed persistent headaches from blood sugar fluctuations. My vision occasionally blurred. Fatigue became my constant companion. Simple tasks like climbing stairs left me winded. I lost weight rapidly, a dangerous sign that my body was breaking down muscle for energy because it couldn't properly use glucose. My parents, bizarrely, interpreted these symptoms as the toxins leaving my body. "It gets worse before it gets better," Mom assured me one evening when I nearly collapsed after dinner. "Your body is detoxifying from all those chemicals." I wanted to scream that insulin isn't a toxin. It's a hormone my body should produce naturally but can't. Instead, I nodded weakly and retreated to my room. Financial planning consumed my evenings. I calculated that I needed approximately $5,000 to cover first and last month's rent, security deposit, moving expenses, and a buffer for medical supplies. My savings stood at $3,200. I picked up freelance graphic design projects, working late into the night after my day job ended. I sold and used electronics, clothing, and even my beloved collection of art books on eBay. To reduce expenses, I started secretly rationing my insulin and test strips. Instead of checking my blood sugar 8 times daily, I limited myself to 4 checks. I reduced my basal insulin rate and took chances with carbohydrate counting that I never would have considered before. Each decision was a calculated risk, balancing immediate survival against long-term health consequences. My parents' control grew increasingly intrusive. Mom began checking the medicine cabinet daily, noting with satisfaction that my insulin pens remained untouched, unaware that my active supply was hidden elsewhere. Dad questioned why I still needed doctor appointments if I was going natural. They monitored my food intake obsessively, pushing their concoctions of supposed blood sugar-lowering foods and herbal teas. "You're not committed enough to the program," Dad accused when he found me looking pale and shaky one morning, actually the result of nocturnal hypoglycemia I had barely managed to correct. These natural cures only work if you believe in them. My colleague Rachel, the only person at work who knew about my diabetes, noticed my declining condition during video meetings. "You look terrible," she messaged me privately one afternoon. "What's going on?" When I explained the situation, her response was immediate and forceful. "That's insane. You need to get out of there. My sister's apartment has a spare room opening next month. It's yours if you want it." That offer became my lifeline, a concrete exit strategy with a specific timeline. If I could just hold on for 3 more weeks, I could escape this increasingly dangerous situation. But my body had other plans. The crisis occurred 26 days after Christmas, on a Tuesday morning. I had been stretching my insulin dangerously thin, taking just enough to prevent ketoacidosis, but not enough for optimal control. My blood sugar had been running consistently high for days, leaving me in a state of constant exhaustion and mental fog. I was in the middle of a video conference with clients when the symptoms hit suddenly. First came the extreme thirst. My mouth felt like sandpaper despite the 3 glasses of water I had already consumed that morning. Then the rapid, shallow breathing as my body tried to expel excess acids. Finally, the abdominal pain that doubled me over mid-sentence. Rachel, who was leading the presentation, noticed immediately when my video froze and I disappeared from the call. She tried texting, then calling. When I didn't respond, she made the split-second decision that would ultimately save my life. She called emergency services and gave them my address. My next clear memory is of paramedics in my bedroom, checking my vital signs and pricking my finger for a blood glucose reading. The meter displayed high, meaning my blood sugar exceeded the maximum reading of 600 milligrams per deciliter. One paramedic was already preparing an insulin injection while another placed an oxygen mask over my face. "Diabetic ketoacidosis," I heard one say to another. "Severe dehydration. Possible respiratory compromise." I was loaded onto a stretcher, barely conscious as they carried me through the house. My mother appeared in the hallway, her face contorted with confusion and fear. "What's happening? What's wrong with her?" she demanded. "Your daughter is in diabetic ketoacidosis," the paramedic explained curtly. "It's life-threatening. We're taking her to Memorial Hospital." But that's impossible, Mom protested, following us toward the door. She's been taking natural remedies. The cinnamon and apple cider vinegar. The paramedic shot her a look of disbelief as they continued moving me toward the ambulance. The emergency room was a blur of activity, 4 lines for insulin, fluids, and electrolytes. Blood draws, heart monitors, and the constant beeping of medical equipment. A doctor hovered over me, asking questions I could barely process. The one question I remember clearly was, "How long have you been without adequate insulin?" "Since Christmas," I whispered through the oxygen mask. "Parents, too expensive, had to ration." His expression hardened as he made notes in my chart. Hours later, after stabilization in the emergency department, I was transferred to the intensive care unit. My blood work showed severe acidosis, dangerously high potassium levels, and signs of kidney strain. The attending physician explained that I had narrowly avoided diabetic coma and possible brain damage. My parents arrived at the hospital in the early evening, having been contacted as my emergency contacts. They entered my ICU room cautiously, Mom's eyes red from crying, Dad looking uncomfortable in the medical environment. Dr. Santos, the endocrinologist on call, was reviewing my chart when they arrived. He introduced himself and then delivered the assessment I had never had the courage to state so plainly. "Your daughter nearly died today," he said, his tone professional but stern. "Diabetic ketoacidosis has a mortality rate between 2 and 5% even with proper treatment." Amber's case was severe. Another few hours without intervention, and we might be having a very different conversation. Mom started crying again. "We didn't know. We thought the natural treatments would work." "There is no natural treatment for type 1 diabetes," Dr. Santos stated firmly. "This is an autoimmune condition where the pancreas produces no insulin whatsoever. Without synthetic insulin, death is inevitable." Dad shifted defensively. "We were just trying to help her avoid these expensive treatments. The pharmaceutical companies charge outrageous prices. So you decided the solution was to withhold life-saving medication?" The doctor's voice remained level, but his disapproval was palpable. "I'm required by law to report suspected medical neglect, even for adult dependents." My parents blanched at this statement. "Report? But we're her parents. We were trying to help." Mom protested. A hospital social worker named Ms. Jenkins joined us shortly afterward. She explained that given the circumstances, she would be consulting with Adult Protective Services about the situation. She also informed my parents that since the medical crisis resulted from withholding necessary medication, insurance might deny coverage for the hospitalization. The bill for ICU care could exceed $15,000 per day, she explained. "Without insurance coverage, you would be responsible as the householders." My parents looked stricken. The reality of their decision was finally hitting home, not just the physical consequences to me, but the financial implications for them. As they processed this information, I found my voice. "I told you I would die without insulin," I said, my voice raspy from the breathing treatments. "I've been saying it for 14 years, but you never listened. You decided your bank account was more important than my life." Mom began sobbing again. "We didn't understand. We thought." "You thought wrong," I interrupted. "And you didn't bother to research or listen to medical professionals. You found random internet articles that confirmed what you wanted to believe." Dad started to argue, but was cut off by alarms from my heart monitor as my blood pressure spiked. A nurse rushed in and asked them to step out while she checked my vital signs. When they were gone, I turned to Ms. Jenkins, the social worker. "I need to move out immediately," I said. "I have a place lined up, but I need help with the transition while I recover." MS. Jenkins nodded understandingly. "We'll make sure you have a safe discharge plan. No one is sending you back to an environment where your medical needs won't be met." That moment, lying in an ICU bed with tubes and monitors attached to my body, became my breaking point and turning point simultaneously. The fear and uncertainty of the past month crystallized into a single, unshakable resolution. I would never again compromise my health for anyone else's convenience or financial benefit. Rachel arrived that evening after visiting hours had technically ended, but the nursing staff made an exception when I explained she was helping with my housing arrangements. She took one look at me, pale, weakened, attached to multiple forelines, and her eyes filled with tears. "This is so messed up," she said, squeezing my hand. "But we're getting you out. Jessica already cleared the spare room. We can move your essential stuff this weekend." For the first time since Christmas, I felt something beyond fear and resignation. I felt hope. I spent 5 days in the hospital, 3 in intensive care and 2 on the regular medical floor. During that time, a team of professionals helped me rebuild not just my health, but my independence. Dr. Santos adjusted my insulin regimen and ordered new supplies, including a more advanced continuous glucose monitor that would alert me earlier to dangerous trends in my blood sugar. The hospital pharmacist helped me apply for a patient assistance program that would reduce my insulin costs by 70%. A nutritionist reviewed meal planning strategies that would work on a limited budget. Most valuable was Lisa, a financial counselor specializing in chronic disease management. She spent hours helping me navigate insurance options, patient assistance programs, and budgeting strategies. "Many patients don't realize they qualify for these programs," she explained, reviewing application forms with me. Pharmaceutical companies created them partly as public relations efforts, but they do provide genuine assistance if you can navigate the paperwork. Lisa also helped me apply for emergency medical assistance that would cover my hospital stay and provide 3 months of supplies while I stabilized my finances. The application process was complex, requiring documentation of my income, expenses, and medical necessity, but with her guidance, I completed everything before discharge. My parents visited daily, their attitudes shifting between defensive justification and tearful apologies. I maintained polite but emotional distance, focusing instead on my recovery and exit strategy. When they realized I was actually planning to move out immediately, panic set in. "But you're not well enough yet," Mom protested. "You need family to take care of you." "Family that denies me life-saving medication isn't taking care of me," I responded calmly. "I've made arrangements." Dad attempted financial arguments. "You can't afford to live on your own with all these medical expenses." "I can't afford not to," I countered. "My life literally depends on it." The day before my discharge, I asked Rachel to help me implement the first phase of my plan. While my parents were visiting me at the hospital, Rachel and her sister Jessica went to my parents' house with the key I had given them. They quickly packed my essential belongings, clothing, personal items, important documents, and work equipment. Most importantly, they retrieved my hidden diabetes supplies and medical records. That evening, I wrote my parents a letter explaining my decision. I didn't want a face-to-face confrontation during the actual move, which would only escalate emotions and potentially compromise my still fragile health. "I will always love you as my parents," I wrote, "but I cannot trust you with my healthcare anymore. This experience has shown me that I need to prioritize my survival above family harmony. I hope someday you will understand that insulin for me is not optional. It's as essential as oxygen." The day of my hospital discharge, Rachel picked me up in her sedan already filled with my belongings. We drove directly to the small 2-bedroom apartment she shared with Jessica, a nurse who worked night shifts at a nearby hospital. The spare room was tiny but clean, with just enough space for a twin bed and small desk. It felt like a palace compared to the ICU. "It's temporary," Rachel assured me. "Just until you get back on your feet. Jessica's on night shifts for the next 3 months, so you'll barely overlap." Setting up my independent medical care became my top priority. I transferred my prescriptions to a pharmacy near our apartment, scheduled follow-up appointments with Dr. Santos, and organized my supplies in a dedicated storage container. I created a spreadsheet tracking usage rates and reorder dates to ensure I would never run short again. Professional changes followed quickly. My company had been understanding about my medical emergency, but I needed better insurance coverage and higher income to support my new independence. I leveraged my portfolio of freelance projects to secure a position with a larger design agency that offered comprehensive benefits and a 30% salary increase. During my interview, I took a calculated risk by being transparent about my condition. I have type 1 diabetes, which is well managed but requires consistent care, I explained to the creative director. My recent hospitalization was a one-time emergency due to circumstances that have been resolved. I need occasional flexibility for medical appointments, but they won't interfere with deadlines or productivity. To my surprise, the director nodded understandingly. My nephew has type 1. I know the drill. We can absolutely accommodate reasonable medical needs, and our insurance plan has good prescription coverage. Just keep communication open with your team. That conversation, being treated as a professional with a manageable medical condition rather than a burden, reinforced that I had made the right decision. Meanwhile, the consequences for my parents unfolded rapidly. The hospital reported the situation to Adult Protective Services, triggering an investigation into medical neglect. Though criminal charges were unlikely given my adult status and partial independence, the investigation itself caused significant disruption. Investigators interviewed neighbors and family friends, creating whispers throughout their social circle. The financial fallout hit even faster. Without insurance coverage for my hospitalization due to the medically unnecessary lapse in treatment clause, my parents received bills totaling nearly $40,000. Their appeals were denied when medical records confirmed they had knowingly discontinued necessary treatment against medical advice. My father's professional reputation suffered when colleagues learned about the situation through the small-town grapevine. As an insurance salesman, his credibility depended on trust in his judgment about risk management, trust now severely undermined by his mishandling of his own daughter's health insurance needs. These consequences gave me no pleasure. Despite everything, they were still my parents, and I understood their actions came from financial anxiety rather than malice. But the situation had clarified something essential. Good intentions don't prevent harm when they're based on misinformation and denial. As January turned to February, I established new rhythms in my independent life. My health improved dramatically with consistent medication and reduced stress. My new job challenged and engaged me creatively. My tiny room became a sanctuary of self-determination. Most importantly, I no longer had to justify or defend my right to necessary medical care. The freedom to manage my diabetes according to medical science rather than financial constraints felt like taking my first full breath after months of suffocation. By March, the ripple effects of my parents' Christmas decision had spread far beyond what any of us could have anticipated. The hospital pursued my parents aggressively for the unpaid medical bills, eventually placing a lien against their property when payments fell behind. Their credit scores plummeted, forcing them to postpone the kitchen renovation they had ironically been planning to fund with the savings from cutting off my medical care. The investigation by Adult Protective Services concluded without criminal charges, but resulted in mandatory education sessions about medical neglect and caregiver responsibilities. My father found these sessions particularly humiliating, especially when colleagues discovered he was attending them. Extended family who had previously been unaware of the situation learned the truth when my mother's sister visited during one of the APS home assessments. Aunt Linda, a retired nurse, was horrified by the story and called me immediately. "I had no idea they were doing this to you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your uncle and I would have helped with expenses if they were struggling. There was no reason to put your life at risk." Linda became an unexpected ally, helping educate other family members about type 1 diabetes and correcting my parents' narrative that I had overreacted to their suggestion of alternative treatments. At family gatherings, which I now attended independently, relatives who had previously been distant offered support and understanding. Meanwhile, my own life was transforming in unexpected ways. The patient assistance program I had applied for through the hospital not only reduced my insulin costs, but connected me with a diabetes advocacy group focused on affordable access to medication. I began attending their monthly meetings, initially seeking support, but eventually becoming an active participant. "Your story is powerful," the group leader told me after I shared my experience. "So many people don't understand the life or death nature of insulin access. Would you consider speaking at our community education event? That invitation led to opportunities one never could have imagined. I created a presentation about diabetes misconceptions that was shared with local schools and community centers. I started a blog documenting my journey to independence and diabetes self-advocacy, which attracted readers facing similar challenges with family understanding and support. Through the advocacy group, I met Eliza, an attorney specializing in healthcare rights, who helped me understand the legal aspects of my experience. What happened to you fits a pattern we see too often, she explained over coffee. Financial concerns override medical necessity, and misinformation fills the gap. But your case is unusual because you found a way out before the worst happened. Eliza invited me to participate in a panel discussion at a healthcare policy forum, where my story helped illustrate the real-world implications of insulin pricing and accessibility issues. A local news station covered the event, and suddenly my private family drama became part of a larger public conversation about healthcare affordability. My health flourished under my new self-directed care regimen. For the first time since diagnosis, my hemoglobin A1C, the 3-month average of blood glucose, fell into the optimal range. The symptoms that had plagued me during the rationing period, fatigue, mood swings, blurred vision, disappeared completely. My endocrinologist noted that preventing even one episode of diabetic ketoacidosis potentially saved me from long-term organ damage. You made the right choice prioritizing your health, Dr. Santos confirmed during my 3-month follow-up. Some complications from poorly controlled diabetes can never be reversed. Perhaps most surprisingly, my professional life blossomed in ways I hadn't anticipated. My new employer was impressed with my design work and organizational skills. When they learned about my advocacy work, they encouraged me to leverage my personal experience in healthcare-related projects. I was assigned to design materials for a pharmaceutical client's patient education program, bringing both my professional skills and lived experience to the project. 6 months after my hospitalization, Rachel's lease was ending, and she planned to move in with her boyfriend. Rather than finding another roommate situation, I took another leap toward independence and leased a small studio apartment closer to my office. The rent stretched my budget, but the privacy and autonomy were worth every penny. The day I signed the lease, I texted a photo of the keys to Rachel with the caption, "Official adult status achieved." Her response made me laugh through tears. About time. I was getting tired of your color-coded food containers in the fridge. So proud of you, warrior woman. As for my parents, their journey took longer and more complicated paths. The financial consequences forced them to confront reality in ways they had avoided for years. The medical bills eventually necessitated withdrawing funds from their retirement accounts, resulting in penalties and tax consequences that further strained their finances. More painfully for them, their social standing in the community eroded as the story spread. Friends they had known for decades viewed them differently. Their church pastor suggested counseling to address the breach of parental care. Neighbors who had previously sought Dad's insurance advice now politely declined his business cards at community events. 3 months after my departure, Mom reached out via text, "We miss you. Can we talk?" I agreed to meet at a coffee shop, neutral territory where we could maintain boundaries. She arrived alone, looking older and more subdued than I remembered. "Your father isn't ready to admit he was wrong," she explained, stirring her untouched coffee. "But I am. I should have protected you. I failed as a mother." Her apology seemed genuine, if incomplete. She still framed the situation primarily in terms of her feelings and identity rather than my well-being. But it was a start. "I don't hate you, Mom," I told her honestly. "I just can't trust you with my health anymore." She nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Can we start over somehow? Not living together again, but maybe occasional family dinners? Birthday calls? I don't want to lose my only daughter completely." That conversation began a careful, limited reconciliation. We established clear boundaries, no health advice, no financial discussions, no pressure to return home. We met monthly for coffee, gradually rebuilding a relationship based on mutual respect rather than dependence and control. Dad took longer to come around. His pride and fear of legal consequences kept him distant for nearly 6 months. When he finally agreed to meet, his approach was characteristically practical rather than emotional. "I've been taking classes about diabetes," he said, sliding a certification of completion across the cafe table. "The hospital offered them as part of our arrangement. I thought I understood your condition, but I didn't." Not really. It wasn't quite an apology, but from my father. This acknowledgement of ignorance represented significant growth. Our relationship remained strained, but the door to eventual understanding had been nudged open. The most unexpected outcome of this painful chapter was discovering my own resilience and capacity for self-advocacy. The young woman who had meekly said, "Okay," to a life-threatening demand on Christmas Day was gone, replaced by someone who confidently navigated healthcare systems, spoke at advocacy events, and built an independent life on her own terms. 1 year after that fateful Christmas Day announcement, my life had transformed completely. My studio apartment, though small, represented freedom and safety I had never known as an adult. Photos and artwork hung on walls without requiring permission. My medical supplies occupied an entire cabinet without apology or justification. My cat Percy, adopted from a local shelter, provided companionship and a sense of responsibility beyond myself. My career had advanced further than I could have imagined. The healthcare projects I designed won industry recognition, leading to a promotion to senior designer with another salary increase. The financial stability allowed me to build an emergency fund specifically for medical expenses. Never again would I risk rationing insulin due to cost concerns. My relationship with my parents had stabilized into a new normal. We maintained careful boundaries, meeting monthly for dinner at restaurants where conversations remained in neutral territory, current events, extended family news, and increasingly, my professional accomplishments, which they now followed with genuine pride. Their own circumstances had changed significantly. The financial burden of my hospitalization forced them to downsize, selling the family home and moving to a smaller townhouse in a less expensive neighborhood. Dad transitioned to part-time work, abandoning plans for full retirement. Mom took on additional tutoring hours to supplement their income. These changes brought unexpected perspective. "We were so focused on saving money," Mom admitted during one of our dinners, "that we couldn't see the value of what we were risking. No renovation or retirement account is worth your life." My father, less emotionally expressive but equally transformed, demonstrated his change through actions rather than words. He volunteered with a diabetes parent support group, sharing his cautionary tale to help others avoid similar mistakes. He forwarded articles about diabetes research and insurance policies that might benefit me, carefully noting that these were FYI only, not advice. The medical neglect investigation eventually closed with mandatory education completed and no criminal charges filed. The hospital bills were settled through a combination of payment plans, retirement account withdrawals, and eventually, a medical debt forgiveness program they qualified for after demonstrating financial hardship. My own healing journey extended beyond physical recovery. Weekly therapy sessions helped me process the trauma of having my life-sustaining medication threatened by the people who should have protected me most. I learned to identify hypervigilance around my supplies, the tendency to hoard insulin and check my stock multiple times daily, as a trauma response rather than necessary caution. Support groups introduced me to others with chronic illnesses who had faced family misunderstanding, though rarely with such dramatic consequences. Sharing experiences with people who truly understood the daily reality of type 1 diabetes provided validation I had never experienced before. "You shouldn't have had to nearly die to be taken seriously," my friend Marco from the support group said during one meeting. "But you turned it into something powerful, not just for yourself but for all of us fighting these battles." My advocacy work expanded from occasional speaking engagements to a structured role with the Diabetes Access Coalition. I testified at state legislative hearings about insulin pricing and accessibility, sharing my story as evidence of what happens when financial barriers interfere with essential medication. My blog grew to reach thousands of readers monthly, creating community around chronic illness independence and family dynamics. On the anniversary of my hospitalization, I received an unexpected package from my parents. Inside was a donation receipt showing they had contributed $5,000 to a diabetes research foundation, approximately the amount they had hoped to save by cutting off my treatment. The card simply read, "We understand now. We're sorry. We're proud of who you've become." That evening, I sat on my small balcony watching the sunset, reflecting on the painful journey of the past year and the lessons it had taught me. Health is non-negotiable. No financial consideration justifies compromising essential care. Independence sometimes costs more than dependence, but its value cannot be calculated purely in dollars. Advocacy begins with self, but extends to others facing similar struggles. Even well-meaning people can cause harm when misinformation drives decisions. Forgiveness is possible without forgetting or relinquishing boundaries. Trauma can, with proper support, become a source of strength and purpose. The most important relationships in life must be built on respect for fundamental needs and boundaries. My phone chimed with a message from Rachel. "Happy 1 year of Freedom Day. Drinks this weekend to celebrate?" I smiled and replied, "Absolutely. I'm bringing the sugar-free cocktails." Life with chronic illness would never be simple or inexpensive. Daily management would always require vigilance and resources. But I had discovered something powerful in the past year, the ability to prioritize my health without apology or justification. That revelation was worth every painful step of the journey. I turned to my laptop and began typing a new blog post titled, "1 year later, What Nearly Dying Taught Me About Living." As I wrote, I felt the weight of my experience transform once again from burden to purpose. If my story has resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with standing up for your health needs. Have you ever had to make difficult choices between family expectations and your own well-being? What helped you find the courage to prioritize yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message of hope and self-advocacy, please hit that like button and share this video with them. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength through life's challenges. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Remember that your health is worth fighting for, no matter what anyone else might say.